Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you here today. Now, one of the things I didn't think when I was diagnosed over 4 years ago was that distinguished went hand in hand with being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so thank you. We have a new title, ladies and gentlemen. This presentation will address the challenges of living with a dementia diagnosis within a wider human rights context. When I was diagnosed, I did not think about what my rights were, and yet I was facing many human rights challenges. I suppose before I could even begin to find the courage to think about my rights, I had to find the courage to accept and learn to live with my dementia diagnosis, because that takes a hell of a lot of courage. Some days I like to stay busy and focused, and there are days when I just about manage to push my condition and my unraveling behind a locked door in my mind. But then there are days like today, when I have to remember it, have to face it, and have to speak about this condition for myself and my family. I have to keep speaking out for the many people living with dementia, not just in Ireland, but across the world. Your loved ones, your friends, your neighbours. The majority of us living with dementia are living among you in your communities, and we are fighting hard to stay among you and live as well as we can, but we need support. So to tell you a little bit about the early days and my diagnosis, I'm married to Sean. We have one son, Martin, and as you heard, I live in the northwest of Ireland. At the time of my diagnosis, I was working in the disability sector in physical and sensory. I was a very active citizen, serving on many boards and a promoter of human rights. This was my life before the irrevocability of dementia diagnosis crept in. A lot of my work in community development and the disability sector have been about human rights and advocating for the rights of others. But I stand here today advocating for my own rights. In my mid-50s, I started to experience problems with remembering things, and my memory was not, I felt, what it should be. It only took 5 years and numerous tests and lots of doctors to tell me that I had early onset Alzheimer's. While I was busy planning my retirement, it was the slow realization that a creeping fog had descended on your life and was there for good. My day-to-day tasks became worryingly challenging. First, it was forgetting words, stopping mid-sentence, wondering what I was about to say, searching, covering up, forgetting again. Simple tasks that I'd been doing all my life became a chore and a worry. I found my slow thinking very difficult to deal with. It impacted on me in many ways, such as trying to remember something I had newly learned, seeing words but unable to reach them, forgetting events at recent meetings, forgetting what people had asked me to do. I can still see the look on people's faces and feel the burning silence when words fail to come at a meeting. So I want you to think about yourselves around a big boardroom table and you're trying to remember a word and you see the word and the word won't come. It is so painful. And you try to cover up and you cover up again. I was confused. I found it so hard to motivate myself and to complete tasks. Tasks that once only took a mere minutes were now taking hours. I put it down to taking on too much and just needing a break. Family life became more and more difficult. I would chat with my son on the phone and forget our plans or what we had just discussed as soon as I had hung up, or forget something important my husband had told me. Now, I have to tell you at this stage, one was probably looking for money in the bank, and the other one was looking to be picked up from the pub. So remember, we laugh with Alzheimer's. Prior to my diagnosis, I struggled on at work, still hoping that the mental sluggishness was due to stress and overexertion. It took so much effort just to keep up, to maintain the guise of normality. When the opportunity came for me to take early retirement, I felt I had no choice but to take it, as I slowly drifted from the vital, funny, energetic woman I once was and inhabited only the shadows. I withdrew from my public activities. At home, with no focus outside of myself, the days seemed endless, my energy zapped. I slept long hours and lost all motivation. The deepest, darkest grief descended on me for a life that I would never have. No plans, no travel, no future plans for my family and myself. I was flooded with lots of emotions: frustration, loneliness, depression, and anger about life's changes, and the dreadful isolation. There's no way I can describe the shock of the day I received my diagnosis, or the long, lonely drive home by myself, wondering how I was going to tell my husband and son. There was, however, a degree of relief in getting a diagnosis, as I really thought I was losing my mind. I don't remember the conversation with my family, but I do remember the pain. Ask yourself this question: how do you tell your loved ones that in an undisclosed amount of time you will not be able to recognize them, nor retain any of the wonderful memories that you've banked along the way? I remember lying awake, staring into the blackness, wondering where I would go from here. A flurry of visits to the doctor and a consultant followed. I tried to come to terms with the diagnosis, but there was yet another blow to come: more bad news. The threshold age for early onset Alzheimer's support in Ireland is 65. For anyone diagnosed with early onset dementia-related illnesses before their 65th birthday, there is nothing, and I mean nothing at all: no support services, nowhere to go, no one to give you advice or tips on how to proceed, no one to support your family and give them advice on what was to come. For me, having spent my adult life campaigning for human rights, this was inconceivable. I couldn't believe that because of a random number, I would be ignored. Worse still, refused all help and services. But I didn't have the strength or the will to fight on. I retreated. I felt helpless for the first time in my life. No plans, no ideas, no strategies. Life would never be as it was. Those first few months were spent grappling with heartbreak, and although I still felt my career in voluntary work defined who I was and how I was thought of in the community, I was too ashamed to mention my condition to anyone. I was more than aware of the stigma associated with it. I felt there was nobody to turn to except the internet. Believe me, Google is not the place for early onset. So we must be willing to I have to have a little quote for you, of course. Joseph Campbell once said, "We must be willing to let go of the life we've planned so that to have that life that is waiting for us." So eventually, I began to work on the life that was waiting for me. I got the courage to seek help and start telling people I had the condition. I looked up research being carried out through Trinity College, which led me to the Alzheimer Society of Ireland and the newly formed Irish Dementia Working Group. Until I reached out and got help, all I could see was the deepest grief. I slowly began to tell people, as by now the nurse at the Alzheimer Society had told me that I should start telling people. I hadn't told anybody, as I've said earlier, because of the stigma. I had only told my 4 brothers and 4 sisters. Now, half them believed in Irish style, and the other half were, well, maybe, if you did less. So by now, I began to tell. And from once I started to tell people, it was a new change. I could see some light, some hope. And hope was all I had, because there is no cure for me. Getting a diagnosis is the first step in learning to come to terms with living with dementia. We know that many thousands of people living with dementia do not have a formal diagnosis. This must change, and clinicians can play a major role in making this change. We have a right to know what is wrong with us. Our families and our healthcare professionals can't take that away from us. Having a diagnosis, knowing what was finally wrong, and knowing it had a name was a fundamental part of my journey of learning to live with dementia. So acceptance of my diagnosis has allowed me to go one step further and start to look for a quality of life as a person with dementia, who is a mother, a wife, a sister, a community activist, and a citizen. My rights are fundamental to me, living well, but also to my family. We have right to information, to diagnosis, to post-diagnostic support. We should have a right to community-based services and to home care and to be cared for in the place of our choice. We have the right to be part of our community, no matter what stage our dementia is at. The Irish Dementia Working Group supported me to get involved in advocacy and policy work. All my life I've been an advocate for human rights, and now I find myself fighting not just for my rights, but for the rights of people in Ireland, across Europe and the world. At the G8 summit in London in 2013, David Cameron said that dementia could be turned from one of our greatest challenges into one of our greatest achievements. Realising our rights is one way of ensuring that we turn this challenge into an opportunity. People with dementia have the same human rights as everyone else, but we often face barriers fulfilling those rights. Our rights should include the right to a timely diagnosis, to person-centred quality care, the right to be respected as individuals in our communities. These rights are linked to bigger challenges we face in society with stigma. We can eliminate stigma by involving people with dementia in decision-making and strategy. We need to have a culture where people with dementia have a voice, where they are included in driving forward action on dementia. I have a personal example of the importance of involving people with dementia. At a major ICHOM, Irish Consortium of Health Outcome Measures conference in London in May of this year, I spoke alongside many distinguished professors and lead thinkers in the healthcare industry. I spoke on behalf of people living with dementia to once again highlight the importance of our right to quality of life. However, it was interesting to listen to the input regarding pharma and the changing landscape of patient involvement. One way was to focus on outcomes, on what actually works for the patient, rather than producing drugs that do not work or have side effects that diminish our quality of life. I have made this point at several events I've been asked to speak at. I have made that point that our quality of life matters more than medications masking one symptom and creating a whole lot more. It is important that pharma industry and clinicians listen to our voices, as we have the experiential knowledge. We have learned the wisdom. We do not want a tokenistic approach or involvement in pharma or any other research. So knowing our rights is empowering and encouraging. People with dementia are finally learning to speak out, speak up, and have their voices heard. When we speak, we also speak for those who cannot stand here today, for those who cannot be part of this conference, but whose human rights matter just as much as yours. And today I want to remember my good friend Dermot in Ireland, who joined the European Dementia Working Group. And in the beginning, Dermot told me, ignore most of it now and just remember, we have some rights. So I think it was an important lesson for me to learn as well. So I want to end with an important point about living with dementia diagnosis that can often be forgotten. I am the same person before the diagnosis and after the diagnosis. Yes, I face difficulties. Yes, I know I have a disability, but I am still Helen. So in closing, may I quote Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, "When we face the worst that can happen in any situation, we grow. When circumstances are at their worst, we can find our best." When my circumstances were at their worst, the Alzheimer Society of Ireland and later the Alzheimer Europe teams, the Irish Dementia Working Group and the European Working Group of People with Dementia, supported me to be the best I can today, advocating for people with dementia. Words cannot express my thanks to you all, but I know I want to close this with a piece of music just to remember for the 35 people that are here. I think it reflects me.
The higher you build your barriers, the taller I become. The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, Though you're doing me wrong, so wrong, you thought that my pride was gone. Oh no, there's something inside so strong.